7:30. New this morning, several Jewish organizations are calling for a public apology after an Israeli food truck was banned from a diversity festival in Northeast Philadelphia.
So we first told you about this story yesterday. So Moshava Philly posted that they were disinvited, removed from the Eat Up the Border event at Sunflower Philly in response to anti-Semitic threats aimed at the organizers and threats of protesters.
So Sunflower Philly released a statement saying that they believe in creating a positive and inclusive community space, but due to the ongoing situation, they decided it best to cancel. And if you look at the comments from that post, many people felt like they needed to hear more from Sunflower Philly, and maybe it wasn't fully addressed. So we want to bring in someone to talk about this because the Anti-Defamation League Philadelphia released a new statement last night. So Shira Goodman, the regional director of the Anti-Defamation League for Philadelphia, is joining us now. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Of course. So let's first talk about that new statement that was released. And I'm sure you have seen the comments on Sunflower Philly's page and how people were saying it needed to have a little more.
Yeah, we had thought Sunday morning after this kind of all happened Saturday, and we had heard that they were getting threats of violence, and that's why they had disinvited the truck to start with. Partners in our community, we partnered with the Jewish Federation of Greater Philadelphia, Jewish Community Relations Council, American Jewish Committee, and Jews in All Hues, and the Board of Rabbis. Partners had spoken to some of the organizers and heard about these threats and kind of talked about what a better reaction would have been, a better way to handle it. And we understood that they were talking to the truck on Sunday and talking about possible future events. And we thought that this would be an opportunity to move forward and do good things for the community. Then we heard that the event was canceled and a different statement was put out by Sunflower Philly about an agreement or a policy that the Israeli truck couldn't come unless there was another Middle Eastern or Palestinian food truck. And in our talks yesterday with different parties, nobody else seemed to have known about this agreement or this policy. It didn't seem to apply to any other countries or regional foods that might represent peoples in conflict. And we became concerned, and we really wanted to know what's the real story here. Were there threats of violence, which is obviously despicable, and caving into those kinds of threats is also highly problematic? Or was there a discriminatory policy? And so we got back together last night and said, we really need to know what happened here. Both of these things would be problematic. And we really think that Eat Up the Border, Sunflower Philly need to do some education, need to do some outreach. If they want to live up to their mission, which is about diversity and promoting diversity and celebrating the diversity of all of our immigrant communities, they really need to do some work. So
for people who are not familiar with those organizations, we have two groups. Sunflower Philly, we've got the Educate Our Borders group, or the Eat Our, whatever, we're trying to bring people together. And then we had this whole thing that just went awry, went wrong in so many different ways. So who are those two groups and what should have happened in this situation? Because you've done some investigation.
Well, I think that Eat Up the Borders, as far as I know, is a new group that's been putting on these events in the community, focusing on bringing people together through food and cultures, which is a terrific mission and terrific idea, right? We always do better talking about differences, learning about each other when we're breaking bread, learning about each other's cultures. So, I applaud the mission. Sunflower Philly, I think, is one of the promoters and organizers of this event. I haven't worked with them directly, but they're putting on events in our community. They're people who are doing things to bring together our community, which, of course, we all applaud. But it seems that there's just some confusion here. And the Jewish communal organizations really want to understand exactly what happened so we can help them navigate this in the future and help other organizations in the city. When people are threatened, and I do want to say that the people who are threatening whether to protest or to be violent because the Israeli truck was going to be there, and the people who are angry on the other side and are posting really angry and nasty things, even possible threats. None of that is acceptable, and we need to be better behaved on social media and realize that those words can have real consequences. But we also don't want people caving into threats. We want people to uphold their missions. We want people to act in the best interest, and we want to find ways to navigate that. So if that means coming to a group like the ADL so that we can help talk to law enforcement or security or think about ways to make an event safe, we're happy to partner that way. If that means doing education and making sure that there's a very broad spectrum of people invited to an event, that's another thing. It doesn't mean necessarily disinviting in people to an event or canceling an event. I mean, because now the community is suffering, the trucks are suffering, the businesses are suffering. But we need to have some open dialogue. It seemed to us that a lot of the information that was out there was coming from social media. The timeline was unclear. Certain things were being posted, and as you were piecing it together, we came together as members of the Jewish community and those organizations and said, we really need to know what's happening here so that we can best respond. But in any event, there should be a public apology and a pledge to do better moving forward. And if we can be helpful in bringing those groups together and with other groups and talking about that and how do we do that? How do we do what's best for the people of our city? We want to be part of that.
And do you know at this point whether that has happened, or are there plans to have that happen between Eat Up the Borders and Sunflower Philly and Moshava Philly?
I know there have been conversations between Eat Up the Borders and Moshava. I think that I haven't talked to those parties directly, but I have heard that they've had conversations about future events.
Okay.
And I have heard both that Representative Jared Solomon has talked about bringing people together in a meeting. I know that the Jewish Community Relations Council has asked about convening some kind of meeting with the parties and different organizations. So I'm hopeful that that will happen. Because
Sunflower Philly is supposed to be a community space, right? It's like a garden area, and they have events and they celebrate different things. So it seems like you know, it should have been a different situation that should have happened there, and it's unfortunate that it didn't.
I think that's right. And I think that these things, I want to be clear, can spiral. Seeing hateful, violent, threatening rhetoric online can be very intimidating. That is actually, of course, the goal of those posters, to intimidate somebody into action. And we want to give people the support and the resources they need so that they can respond to that in a way that's true to their mission and true to the values of our city of inclusivity and diversity. And so I think we do need to do some education all around, and the city needs to come together around this. So I think there's an opportunity there, but we do need to figure out exactly what happened and why so that we can address that part of the issue.
And it's good to start out with that conversation. That's a really good place to start. So we can all, that education is the important thing. That's the takeaway. It's what we can all do to make some change.
Right. So thank you. Thank you, Shira Goodman, for talking to us about this and giving us the latest. And we'll, of course, stay on top of it. We also want to point out that we did reach out to the owners of Moshava Philly food truck, but they declined to be on TV. And we also contacted Sunflower Philly and Eat Up the Borders, but we have not heard back. So we have reached out to everyone who's involved with the situation. And just like Shira mentioned, we're all trying to learn more information to figure out how we can solve this and move forward together.
And do better next time.